Please welcome our third speaker for today, technologist Nigel Parker.
Thank you.
I was sitting in a bar and this guy came up to me. He said, "My life stinks." I looked at his gold credit card. I looked at the way he was checking people out across the room. Then I looked at his face, and he had quite a good-looking face. And I said to him, "Dude, your perspective on life sucks."
Hi, I'm Nigel Parker. I'm a web evangelist working for Microsoft in Auckland. And I'm here today to talk to you about failure and why I think failure is the best possible outcome. It's common practice in scientific circles to come up with a scientific theory and then disprove that theory. And I wish we applied this more to other businesses and other ways that we approach our lives. There's always going to be the naysayers, the people who stand out there and say, "That will never work." Well, what were you thinking when you came up with that idea in the first place? And some of the greatest inventors, Leonardo da Vinci, Thomas Edison, were men who were renowned for their successes, but also had many failures behind them. Thomas Edison had more than 1,000 patents to his name, and most of them, or a lot of them, resulted in failure. He had a vision where he was going to build a patent for a concrete single-clad house, which was supposed to be cheaper than the construction of the time. But when he put that into effect, it was a failure. So he moved his attention to concrete furniture, the idea of it being durable and sustainable and would travel well. But when he was shipping that to his first trade show, it was destroyed along the way and it didn't arrive in its destination. A bit quick on that one. Problem with not using PowerPoint. So I've got to ask a question, is how do you handle failure? How do you handle failure in your own lives? I believe that how to fail is a learnt behavior, and one that most people don't do very well. But we learn how to fail from a very young age. Some examples here from when I was a child. I struggled with learning to write, and I had teachers that were supportive, and also teachers that told me off or held me back. And through that process, I had to look at it and say, what is failure? Where does failure sit? And with the absence of failure, I truly believe that you can't be successful. You have to look, without failure or success, we're destined to a place of mediocrity. And in that place of mediocrity, we won't succeed. So great companies and great people fail very often. Famous quote from Bill Gates from 1989, "We'll never make a 32-bit operating system." So being a market leader, it's even more reason to think outside the square. Hands up if you remember the Sony Walkman, the canary yellow one from the late 80s. So a lot of people. This product was a market leader at the time. And then what happened? The definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So Sony continued and developed the Disman, which was also another good piece of technology. But at the time, there were other players in the market. There were people competing with Sony with a similar type product. So Sony turned around and invented the mini disc player. Hands up who had a mini disc player? Not that many people. So a mini disc player was a great idea of being able to record digital quality thing, but it was surpassed by the MP3 player. And by this time that Sony had their MP3 player, they were no longer a market leader. The trick's to know when to adjust your perspective. Sony diverged and came up with the e-book reader, which was based on the Disman technology. They also had a Sony Walkman, which took photos and played MP3 players. And there was a joint venture with Sony Ericsson to develop a phone, carrying the Walkman brand, playing music and movies. And anyone in the room got a Sony Rollo, a little robot that rolls around, it flicks its arms out, it dances, it shows lights, and it plays music. This is another Sony invention. But sometimes we're taken by surprise. For example, when the internet came along, we had it as our 5th or 6th priority. A quote from Bill Gates from 1998. And the famous quote from the Apollo 13 mission, "Failure is not an option." But I see failure as inevitable. I actually think that if you plan to fail, you're going to be stronger. And hopefully there won't be people around you who put you in fear of that failure and have it actually happening. And you need to be prepared to handle the failure when it comes about. It's a great example. How many people here are familiar with Twitter.com? We saw it in the social media video just before. So quite a number of hands. Twitter was one of those companies that grew unexpectedly. It got a lot more demand, and it got demand at a point when events were happening and people were trying to use its service. And it often fell over at those pivotal times when people needed it the most. And they came up with this concept of the fail whale to make light of the fact that the service was unavailable and it was failing. And the users turned around and were actually well received to that message. So you've got to know what's in your wing mirror, and you've got to put that in perspective and know when to choose a different path or when to address a problem that exists instead of just hiding it. Anyone read this book here by Clayton Christensen called The Aventis Dilemma? It's a brilliant book. He talks about this theory of disruptive technology. And along the x-axis here, we have time, and up the y-axis, we have performance. And then when you think about a traditional market, at the bottom end of the market are low-quality goods. These are items that are sold in large volumes to a broad number of people. And then at the top end of the market are high-quality goods. These are items that cost a lot more money, are bought by less people, but the people who buy them are really happy with their purchase. And this concept that Clayton came up with was the idea of a disruptive technology. It's something that comes in at the bottom of the market and catches the market by surprise. And then it changes the market as it enters it and evolves over time to the point that it actually competes with the top end of the market. So to give you an example, I've been working recently with Andy Blood and TBWA, and we worked on a project with Adidas to launch the All Black jersey. And we had a whole bunch of fans coming to the home games and taking photos, along with professional photographers. And this is the result of all of those disposable film cameras as they were returned at the end of the game. So the concept here that I'm sort of alluding to, I actually thought about it at the time, and I thought, why isn't there a disposable digital camera? It seems that since digital technology is prevalent in the market, something like that must exist. And it turns out that it actually did exist a few years ago in the United States. A company called Pure Digital came up with a disposable digital camera and was selling it for $20 US. And then what they did was they returned it to the store to get prints and then resold the camera 2 or 3 times over to make their money back. It was a very successful model. And then they followed up with a second model which actually displayed the photos to you. The problem was once they actually started showing you the photos that you'd taken, people were less inclined to bring the camera back because they no longer needed the prints. And this was complicated by hackers who got in and took apart the camera and figured out a way to actually take the photos off it. So then it just became a cheap digital camera as opposed to a disposable cheap digital camera. So this was a large failure for the company. The company lost a lot of money in this project and they had to go back to the drawing board. But the founders of the company looked at that and said, well, the same market exists in digital video cameras. And it's actually more rewarding because there's a higher price point. And at the time, internet video was really taking off, and the services themselves were becoming better. YouTube, Vimeo, they were all going into HD video. And they thought, well, there must be a device that we can bring to market that is solid state and easy to get onto the internet. So this is a Flip HD. This is selling for $160 US. It takes HD video, and it's straight onto the internet in high definition. And this was one of those technologies that is a disruptive technology. It started at the bottom of the market when there were only players at the high end. It took over the analog area of the market, and now it's challenging the market leaders. So this is a shot from the Worldwide Developers Conference where Steve Jobs actually called out the Flip HD as a technology or a competitor. And if anyone's noticed, the iPod Shuffles now have cameras in them, which is the bottom end of the iPod Shuffle market. This is a great example of a disruptive technology. And for Pure Digital, they had their payday in March. They sold to Cisco Systems for $590 million. It was a nice return for the inventors of that technology company. But this is TED. And you're probably sitting here thinking, I'm not technical. And how does this concept of failure relate to me in my own life? So what I wanted to do now was actually change tacks a little bit and talk about the art of failure as I see it. Now, this isn't a scientific principle. This is just something that I've been thinking about recently. And the concept of commitment versus attachment, this is deep-seated in a lot of religions and a lot of historical literature. But the way I work every day on commitment versus attachment, the idea of being committed to something means that you're passionate about driving to the outcome. You're passionate about achieving and getting there. But the difference is when you think about attachment, you're actually attached to that outcome. And it's more negative because if things change, the goalposts move, you're not in a position to adjust or to change your focus. And when you're attached to an outcome, if that outcome doesn't come off for you, it's a real problem. So the way I like to think about it in my life is you have to favor commitment over attachment. You have to have the passion, but you have to remove the attachment to a particular result, so that if that result doesn't happen, you can quickly fail. To give you another example, I've got a 3-year-old daughter, Indigo, and I've loved the process of getting to know her, teaching her from birth right through to the point where she is now. And my wife and I were talking about having another baby. We were a little bit reluctant to do so, but it was something that we actually chose together to do. And we were committed to an outcome of having a boy. And we went on the internet and we were finding out how to make a boy, all the things that you do. The wives' tales of, favoring a boy baby. This is the scan. Our baby's due on Christmas Day on the 25th of December. And we went to the radiologist department as soon as we could to find out if we were successful in making a baby boy. But when I got that news, I was disappointed. But by the time I'd actually left the radiologist's office, I'd got over it. And I was excited about having a little daughter. And that's because I was committed to having a boy, but I wasn't attached to having a boy. And that was the best example I could think of to actually make that real for you and something from my own life. So we don't have the money, so we have to think. We've been given this as the question for the conference for here today. And this is something from a great New Zealander, Sir Ernest Rutherford. And when I was thinking about this quote in relation to failure, it brought me back to what I've been doing in my own job. I've been with Microsoft for 5.5 years. And in the last 2 years I've been working for Microsoft, things have changed. We've gone into a global recession, and things have got pretty tough. There's been a lot of layoffs and redundancies within Microsoft worldwide. And they have affected New Zealand. They've affected the team that I work in. And we have less money to play with. There's less marketing dollars. There's less money to actually go out and do things. So in this premise of having less and needing to achieve more, I was thinking about what is it that I'm committed to at work right now and how I could share some of that insight with you here. So there's a couple of technologies, being the web evangelist, that I've been told to work with. And when I look at Internet Explorer, I actually see that as a market leader, but one that's being challenged by some of these disruptive technologies that I'm talking about before. And then on the other side, I'm working with a technology called Silverlight, which in itself is one of those disruptive technologies, starting at the bottom of the graph and moving up, and challenging the market leader that is Flash. So what I wanted to do was spend the next minute sharing some views of how I've approached these problems without money. This is an example here. I went out on Father's Day to Piha and took a photo essay of Piha and Lion Rock. And I did this using the Silverlight and photosynth technologies. And I uploaded that to the internet, where I had more than 12,500 views in the last month of this technology using the Silverlight platform. I mentioned earlier I was working with Andy Blood and the All Blacks, launching the new All Black jersey. This project here was a generation of professional photographers and also user-generated content, and it was voted as one of the world's top 5 creative campaigns for the month of August. And this was something that was really, quite easy to do. And just last week I was working with MSN in New Zealand on New Zealand Fashion Week. And I built this image viewer here in Silverlight to actually show very high-resolution photos from the event. And this was photos that you couldn't get anywhere else. and it was all of the shows, all of the designers, and it was something that was readily available to people online. So what I wanted to do was just leave you with a question, something to take away, I suppose. You're probably sitting here thinking, well, what is it that I could fail at in my life? What is it that I'm doing reluctantly? Or what is it that I could change because the goalposts have changed and I haven't actually changed my point of view? So if you can think of one or two of those things, I challenge you to actually make a difference and go and talk to who needs to be talked to actually enjoy or have passion for that task again. So, yeah, that's pretty much the content that I wanted to cover. And I do want to thank you for listening to this talk. And I know I'm running short. I've purposely made this talk a little bit shorter than time allocated. But I did want to say one more thing. I dedicate this presentation to the memory of my father, who passed away in August. And his name was Ted, which was the reason I wanted to come here and do this today. But he was actually from a generation that didn't know how to fail. And unfortunately, he was scared of failure. And that resulted in quite a serious event. So if there's anyone in this audience who actually relates to that and is scared of failure, please take heed to this warning and see failure as the best possible outcome. Thank you.